All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our panel, Deep Divide, Low and Mid-Tech in the Age of High-Tech. I would like to start off by drawing on Her Excellency Lana Nusseibeh's words from yesterday, which reminded us the fact that technology is not just an economic driver, it's a cornerstone of sovereignty and resilience. And also repairing order requires us, therefore, to rethink trade, technology, and governance all together, right? And this is exactly what we aim to do here today, both at this panel and the Hili Forum overall. However, the discussion, as we heard in the plenary earlier, is very much focused on AI and really high-tech, etc. Our discussion isn't only about the front runners. So we will look at the low and the mid-tech nations, because we don't want them to be condemned to be left behind. And they can leapfrog legacy systems, they can carve out niches, and also turn the so-called divide into an opportunity, rather, for prosperity and strategic autonomy. Therefore, today, we'll explore how accessible adaptable technologies, whether they're in technological infrastructure, whether in energy or cybersecurity, how they can be harnessed to secure sovereign development and also competitive advantage. So I'm delighted to be joined here by four distinguished speakers. Firstly, Dr. Tanya, founder and CEO of StateUp and editor-in-chief of the Cambridge Forum on Technology and Global Affairs. Welcome. Second, we have Dr. Gedaliah Afterman, head of the Asia Policy Program at the Abba Eban Institute. And we have Dr. Ayano, director of computer vision research at the Ethiopian Artificial Intelligence Institute. And also we have Dr. Patil, director of the Center for Security, Strategy and Technology at the Observer Research Foundation. I did forget to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Ricard Jalkebro. I am associate professor at Agda. And before also we begin, I would like to just some brief housekeeping rules. So each speaker will start with a short opening remark or statement on their view of the topic. I'll then also pose a few questions to kickstart the discussion. But we're dependent on you, the audience, as well. So please engage, join in. You can scan the very high-tech QR code. So I do apologize if we have any low-tech members of the audience that do not have the capacity to scan these. If you do have the old Nokia phones, etc., I do apologize. But this is unfortunately the way we're doing things here. So please fill in and ask the panel questions, and I will get to them on the iPad here, also very, very high-tech. And with that, let's just get started, and let's follow the order you appear on in the program. So, Dr. Tanya Filer, if you may.
Thank you very much, and thank you first of all to the Hili organizers, and very glad to be here with this diverse and expert group to discuss this important topic. And I think it's fantastic that you opened our session talking about resilience. Just thinking back to yesterday morning, which after all the conversations we've heard so far feels a long time ago, we heard, as you mentioned, Assistant Minister Nusseibeh talk about a very distinctly Emirati vision of resilience. And we also heard Baroness Ashton talk about the need for countries to think about national resilience and regional resilience in this flux that we currently find ourselves in. And I think it's absolutely the critical starting point for any conversation about technology today. In fact, I don't think it's necessarily the case that every country should be thinking about autonomy necessarily. I think resilience has to be the starting point, defining and understanding how in this age of dramatic climate change, security challenges, challenges to financial and social inclusion, how each individual country is going to be able to survive and hopefully thrive and adapt through these changes. And then the next layer is to think about the role of technology within that picture, alongside many other levers, policy levers, behavioral change levers. Technology is one part of that. And I think once some of that work has been done, it becomes clearer in terms of thinking through what can be done on the domestic level, how countries can begin to think about digital sovereignty and autonomy. I'm sure we'll get into some of the definitions of that. And then also, of course, to think about various forms of partnership that make sense depending on where different countries are up to. I'll give perhaps just a quick example of countries that I think are doing interesting work and taking interesting approaches on each of those three levels. At the domestic level, if we think about a country like Brazil, it's done a lot of work to develop its own domestic digital public infrastructure. Brazil, of course, has had to think and continues to think a lot about its economic position and economic inclusion. And at the federal level, they've developed PIX, which is a digital payment system now used by 140 million users. So really, again, taking this resilience perspective of needing to think seriously about financial resilience and and developing that technology domestically. It's actually caused some of the trade difficulties we've been talking about as well, has definitely contributed to that. But they've been thinking about digital sovereignty quite strongly. And then if we go to the bilateral and minilateral level, at the bilateral level, I think countries that are taking the most profound approach are really thinking about their own competitive advantage, their own niches, as we've also been discussing, and then thinking about partnerships that complement where they are up to. I can say from the UK perspective, one of the areas that the UK is quite sophisticated in is the emerging area of drug design and discovery and the use of AI within that. But the UK is not good at every single stage of that process. It has particular strengths at the earlier stages. So actually around drug creation, it has less experience, for example, in the area of clinical trials. And so it's in those areas that it's looking for strategic partnerships to be able to build that resilient system around drug discovery. And then finally, just a comment on the minilateral level. I am sure we will come to talk about this in a lot more detail, so I'll keep it brief. I think that there is a really wonderful, in many ways, proliferation of minilateral organizations that are enabling countries to tap into different groups, to develop different forms of knowledge. And I think that that's fantastic. I do think that particularly smaller countries with smaller diplomatic capacity and resource, for example, need to be quite careful about how they diversify so as not to get lost in the mix. I think diversification for those countries needs to be very strategic, very targeted and thoughtful, both about the areas of technology that is most valuable for them to focus on, but also what they hope to achieve. You know, is it the more efficient aggregation of knowledge and they would be able to access alone? Is it infrastructure partnerships? Is it trade partnerships? And then develop a very clear strategy around that. I'll pause there for now. I'm sure we'll come back to touch on some of those themes.
Thank you. Great to be here with everyone. I'll try and talk about three different levels, attack this question from three different levels: the geopolitical, the cross-regional, and the practical, and see what we come with. So we often talk about superpower competition and how technology has become the heart of it, the decisive factor in superpower competition. But I think that picture is becoming a little bit more complicated. It's changing at the moment. We're seeing a growing group of tech middle powers, countries that are not China, that are not the United States, that are not even Russia, countries in the middle that have technological capabilities that are working more and more together, as Tanya just said. And that's an interesting development because these countries working together can become agenda setters. Right? They're not only creating capabilities, but as a group, they can actually shift the technological landscape, If we think about India in terms of digital public goods, if we talk about South Korea in terms of advanced manufacturing, if we talk about Israel in terms of cybersecurity, for example, the UAE, space, AI, right? All of the things we heard about this morning, these countries individually are not marginal players anymore, and together they're quite a technological force. So they can't compete with the US or China on the full range of technologies, but they can definitely compete in specialized areas. But as a group, it creates a different dynamic. And I think that's something that we can think about. And if we reflect on what Lana Nusseibeh said yesterday, it's about being proactive. And so rather than being passive in front of these shifts, in front of these technological competitions, if countries are proactive, working together, you can really position yourself in a strategic way within this time of change. So that's on the geopolitical level. On the cross-regional level, we hear a lot that we're in this era of trade corridors, right? Cross-regional trade corridors, but I think we're actually also in an era of tech corridors, right? Where regions can cooperate through technology. Technology could be the base, bringing regions together. Everyone has heard about the Belt and Road Initiative, right? But a very important element in the Belt and Road Initiative is the digital Silk Road, right? Is the technological element of it, especially here, by the way, in the Gulf. When we think about another such initiative, then we have the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC. And when we think about IMEC, the discussion is very much about ports and rails, but I think it should be about technology. Right? Technological cooperation could lead the way and can make it relevant, can make it effective, can make it a reality much quicker. And that's something that, so I say, let's make IMEC beyond infrastructure. Why not have a digital IMEC? Imagine IMEC not only as a map of rails and ports, right, but a knowledge base linking innovation, linking Bangalore, Dubai, Tel Aviv, Addis Ababa, all together, right? We don't only have to depend on the physical infrastructure. Using a digital infrastructure, it's a different kind of game. And this could bring stability, this can bring prosperity, this can bring knowledge, and also help us close those knowledge gaps or technology gaps that we're talking about. And if just to give a more concrete example of how this could look like, as you said, it's not always about having the most cutting-edge AI solution, right? Many places and many people need mid-technology solutions. And just an example of a project that we're working on at the moment is the idea of developing agri-chatbots in different languages and having area-specific knowledge. So desert agriculture, tropical agriculture, according to the needs. So imagine, for example, a farmer in Egypt or in India or in Ethiopia that can access on his Nokia phone or his smartphone knowledge that he needs straight away, increasing his yield, increasing his profit. And in developing that, we can use knowledge from India, we can use knowledge from the UAE, knowledge from Israel, bringing it all together and creating instruments and tools that help people and bring together solutions from the region for the region. So basically when we think, and by the way, we can use, Tanya, as you said, these mini-lateral platforms. We have quite a few. I2U2, for example, is very relevant, and that's very much focused on food security. So if we think about this agri-chatbot instrument, why not use it as a mini-lateral project, right? And I think that make it much effective. So yes, there is a technological divide. Yes, the competition is growing. Yes, many countries are in the middle between the giants, but working together, specializing on the areas that we're strong in, bringing our strengths together, I think we can move from being in the middle, from being losing in a way, to actually shaping the agenda and positioning ourselves in a much better position. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Reichert. Thank you for inviting me. I would like to say thank you the ECSSR and the AGDA for inviting me for this wonderful forum. I want to speak as someone from Africa. I want to speak about our past experience regarding several industrial revolutions that we missed, and also I want to also emphasize the collaboration and regarding to the high tech. I want to see how Africa will harness this its advantage on this high tech era. So first, as you know, we passed through at least three industrial revolution, and we are now at industrial revolution 4.0. Some argue that we are in industrial 5.0, but if we take, if we like agree that we are in a fourth industrial revolution, as an African nation, we missed the three consecutive industrial revolution. First, during the 80s and up to mid of 20th century, most of African nations are under colonial rule. So the colonial power was using African raw materials rather than enabling the nation to build its own industrial infrastructure. Then after post-independence in mid-20th century, when the electronics and the computer technology were start growing, the colonial power left Africa with weak institutions, and as a result, there is until now there is high political instability, which is manifested by coup d'etats and regime changes, sometimes orchestrated by the outsiders. So we missed all these opportunities to benefit from the industrial evolution that passed through all these stages. Now, after mid of 20th century and in the 21st century, Africa has a little resource to build upon and to compete with the rest of the world. So this creates a big gap among the nations. So there are most of African countries nowadays are in a low tech, and few maybe in a mid tech stage. So the thing is, in order to at least harness the benefits of this high tech, and not to compete actually, but rather to just harness the benefit, the African nation or this low and mid tech nation should focus rather than competing with high techs, better like to embrace selective technological sovereignty and also leapfrogging. Like when you take the Kenyan example or Ethiopian example, there is a low financial inclusion in our country or in our region, but what we came up is with M-Pesa in Kenya and Teleber in Ethiopia to just make a conducive environment for large segment of our society to be included in a financial transaction without having a formal banking system. So this leapfrogging is one of the direction that we need to adapt in order to at least be part of this, be part of or to take the benefit of the 21st century industrial revolution, which is an AI era. The other thing that we can also take an advantage is resource bargaining power for our region, because most of the high-tech industries use raw material that is extracted mostly from the African continent. So the African continent can use that as a bargaining chip to be like creates an interdependence between the high-tech states. So we can exploit our raw material resource as a bargaining chip to create an interdependence between these high-tech nations. The other is we have like most of the African continent's population is youth, like below 30 years. So by training these users, we can compete with this high-tech, or we can also provide a human power or human capital for the who can operate these high-tech technologies, and also contribute as human workforce in these high-tech countries. So there is a possibility in which we can integrate our use through several platforms like remote works, so that they can benefit by taking unemployment in high-tech industries. So there is an example, and there is also a practice that has been happening in our country and also neighboring countries like Kenya. So a lot of users now are engaging in remote works, so especially in area of software engineering. So they are benefiting from the sector. The other thing is the collaboration. Before that, I want to say also in area of AI, we may think like AI is like a very high tech and can't be accessible or affordable by mid tech or low tech country states. But the thing is, we may not have a big infrastructure or a big data center that can compute an AI models with billions of parameters. But we may focus our research in designing an AI model that can run on simple mobile phones, I mean smartphones, so that we may not need like a big data center or cloud infrastructure to like run basic AI models that can directed to solve specific problems. You can say like chatbots. We can say also an AI model that help a farmer to proactively detect the spread of diseases across farmlands. We can also see a basic AI model which can run maybe on a desktop platform, a lightweight one, which can be used by the physician in a remote area to assist them in diagnosis of patients. So we may also focus on these segments of research. Apart from that, we may have also an opportunity to build an energy infrastructure, which is a mid-tech actually, a mid-tech technology. So we can also harness the benefit of generating this electricity and exporting it, and also making the life of our people better. So Ethiopia currently is investing hugely on the infrastructure in generating electrical power, and as we speak, my country is inaugurating a hydropower dam, if you know it, a GERD, which is built on Nile Dam or on Nile River, and we call it Abba River, not Nile actually. So it's a mega structure which generates around 5,000 megawatts. So we have like, just I mentioned this like to indicate that the mid and low tech countries can invest on these areas rather than like aiming to build a semiconductor factory or a factory that manufactures high-end GPUs that can be used to construct a big data center or to train and deploy an AI model. Thank you. Back to Ricard.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jalkebro, for this. I think the advantage of being, the last speaker is that I can build on everyone's comments. But I think what I will do is that let me take a step back and at least highlight 4 issues as such. I think the first idea is of the digital sovereignty. It's a much misaligned or maligned word in that sense. But why the idea of digital sovereignty? I think if you look at, for instance, as Dr. Ayano also mentioned, this particular digital divide which is emerging in terms of the critical and emerging technologies, I think now there is a greater realization of the mixed, or in some cases the harmful effects of the globalization as such, the free flow of data, the free flow of services, the free flow of trade as such. And in a sense, it's an acknowledgement that different states have different capacities when it comes to dealing with these technologies. I mean, if you look at, for instance, the statistics from the International Monetary Fund in terms of the AI Preparedness Index and the Digital Infrastructure Index, the gap between the advanced economies and the low-income countries is almost 3 times, right? So that just shows, that there are gaps in terms of regulation, gaps in terms of governance, gaps in terms of even the absorption of technologies as such. And these stark realities are the ones which are actually driving many of these countries to take a posture, to take a stance which protects their interests, which protects their economies, and at the same time ensure that they're not caught in this broader technological warfare or technological rivalry or contestation which is emerging between the high-tech powers as such, and at the same time protect the citizens from the harmful effects of technology, right? So it's a combination of all of those which is driving this idea of digital sovereignty, and therefore there is a greater control over information, greater control in terms of the storage of data, and greater control in terms of how the social media platforms are operating, which takes me to the second point, is about the accountable technology, accountable tech as such. Today, if you see, the role of social media platforms and the tech companies in interfering in the domestic societies, in interference in terms of just the operations of those companies, is far greater than what was a decade ago, right? But when it comes to the resolution of some of those crises, some of those conflicts, the tech companies and the social media platforms are not exactly offering any hope, right? Which is why the idea of accountable technology, that when you operate in a certain geography, there is a certain cultural context, there is a certain societal reality that these social media platforms have to look at. They cannot for every time say that they are a platform belonging to XYZ country, and therefore they will be abiding by the regulations and the jurisdictions of that particular and the regulations of that particular country as such. They have to be accountable in the jurisdictions that they operate in, and which is what, for instance, is India is now championing this idea of accountable technology, which is that there are certain guidelines which the social media companies have to follow, and it is not that that they can say that it is in a sense infringement of freedom of speech and expression. It is, for instance, diluting the idea of end-to-end encryption. Keeping aside those ideas, it is important for these social media platforms to understand that there is a certain reality that they operate in when they go beyond the countries that they come from. So that's the second idea. The third idea is of strategic autonomy, which Dr. Feiler also mentioned. I think the guiding idea of strategic autonomy is that the countries really do not want to get now entangled in any of these broader contestations and rivalries which are emerging. For instance, they don't want to be caught in the weaponization of supply chains, which we have seen now in the last few years. They don't want to be, for instance, be subject to the export control regulations. So, which is why now there is a policy to say that we will promote domestic innovation ecosystems. We will give a preferential treatment to our own entities, and in a sense, see how that we can take it forward. And as Dr. Feiler mentioned, I think digital public infrastructure or the digital public goods as such is one idea where is one concept where countries are saying that we can actually build resilient, sovereign tech ecosystem, which will help us to withstand all these external pressures and the weaponization of supply chains. I mean, you also mentioned about India, and I think India is a very good example in that particular sense, because we now have a digital public infrastructure powered by this idea called as India Stack, which serves about more than 1.3 billion people, and it's based on this idea of JAM or JAM Trinity, which is basically financial inclusion, mobile-based apps, and national digital ID. Right? These three combined together can actually enable the digital transformation of societies. In fact, we have this digital payment service called as the UPI, which is the Unified Payments Interface. In the month of June, it carried out something like 18 billion transactions in just 1 month, to the tune of almost $2.73 billion. So that just shows, that once the technology answers to the needs and aspirations of the people, it can be widely embraced. And that's the idea behind the digital public infrastructure. And finally, going back to one of the driving questions, which was for one of these sessions, and which Dr. Afterman also mentioned, the idea of minilaterals. The question was, do we need a Bretton Woods 2.0, right? I don't think so, because if you look at, for instance, the Bretton Woods 2.0, and in fact the contemporary multilateral framework, it in a sense reflects the power structures of a bygone era. Of the previous century. It does not really reflect the aspirations and the power structures of the contemporary global order, which is why I think the minilaterals and the plurilaterals are thriving. Because what are minilaterals? Minilaterals are basically a more sophisticated approach of the coalition of the willing, right? In that sense, like-minded countries coming together, which are willing to take some risks to really forge the path of cooperation and realize some common interests as such. And I think if you look at, for instance, as Dr. Afterman mentioned about I2U2, also if you look at, for instance, the Quad, India is part of both of those minilaterals. And if you look at, for instance, the kind of tech cooperation these countries are doing, in terms of the development of quantum technology, in terms of development of standards, it's really showing, that if like-minded countries can come together, they can really do wonders. Now, you can argue that, that the way these minilaterals and the plurilaterals are thriving, they are essentially, chipping away at the legitimacy of the existing multilateral framework. But that's the problem, that if the multilateral framework does not really resonate with the contemporary realities and aspirations, then it is their loss, that then the minilaterals and plurilaterals will really be the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you all. And I think we can build on that, because that was one of the questions in terms of the Bretton Woods 2.0. You say no, what do the rest of the speakers say? Or if we don't need it, then how can low and mid-tech states better negotiate terms collectively then? So is it through these minilaterals? If you can perhaps touch a bit upon these issues, or should be other types of alliances, or standard settings, or innovation pathways? How can we achieve these things then? Whoever wants to chip in, go ahead.
Thank you. Wow, I think we've covered already a lot of ground, and there'll be many different strands to bring together. But just to go to that question and to build on what Dr. Patil was saying, I think we need to be careful in terms of what's realistic in the short term, medium term, and then longer term. In 2018, the UN put out a report acknowledging that existing digital cooperation architecture at the multilateral level was what it called complex and diffused, but not necessarily effective. It then took another 5 years for it to put together an AI advisory board, and then various other work strands around artificial intelligence. So I think it's very important that we think about the timeframes that we're working towards, and have a variety of different approaches that allow us to respond to that, many of which will be at the minilateral level. I think there's absolutely a role for minilateral organizations to serve as a type of lighthouse, which is to say that potentially slightly more advanced digital nations can cooperate on thinking about good practice, thinking about governance around infrastructure, around regulation, and set directions of travel that other countries then could adopt, participate in as appropriate. I mentioned advanced digital nations, and I just want to clarify what I mean by that. I don't necessarily mean just countries in the global north. As we've heard, there are examples from India, there are examples from Brazil of countries, particularly with very large, meaningful population sizes and at scale and experience, who should absolutely be front and center of those conversations. Perhaps just one other observation on kind of where minilaterals can sit and perhaps how minilaterals can help some countries which might be considered low or mid-tech states to really position themselves on the global stage. I think as we've heard, there are many opportunities for cooperation around specific challenges and difficulties that are very, very prominent on the global stage, whether it's food security, water security, terrorism. Minilateral groups of countries, particularly those countries that are on the front lines of some of these issues. So I think certainly the region we're sitting in today, Asia, Africa, I think minilaterals that have that regional focus and are able to take a leadership role around particular global challenges, and then the public purpose innovations that need to be built around them, is very, very useful, and also then positions those countries as adept at tackling challenges of a global order. So I think those are potentially some approaches that we could look to.
So I agree with much of what Tanya said, but I'll add to that, that if like as Dr. Ayano said, if we have open source tools that countries can take and develop, we can share these kind of capabilities that will help countries develop the tools that they actually need and that suit their needs. I think if we change the trend, or if we change the atmosphere to one of cooperation rather than competition among a group of countries, I mean, the lateral grouping, I think that will help a lot in terms of developing the right tools and make it effective for countries' needs. I like your idea of leveraging, rare earth or minerals, and there's other things that can be leveraged, energy, logistics. A lot of countries around the world have youth populations. We heard here that a large population, when it finds a need, then you have suddenly hundreds of millions of people using that technology or that app. I think that's a very big market share, and that can actually be used and leveraged when we're talking about these things. And again, I think the most important thing is creating the right grouping, right? We talked about the Quad, we talked about I2U2, maybe BRICS could be relevant for other things, but it's about pooling our strengths and bringing them together to develop an effective solution, rather than using it as a competition or using it as a lever over other countries, which is the dynamic that we're seeing at the moment. Thank you.
Regarding to the Bretton Woods 2.2, I see things in different perspective. Like unlike the existing Bretton Woods, like IMF, World Banks, who intervene on in so many states' national policies. I thought we need an institute. Maybe we can use already existing platform like UN, so that the UN leads or proposes guidelines which can be agreed by the states to be used as a framework of the governance of these high-tech technologies. Then once we have the framework or a guideline of the governance, which is led by the UN, each country can adopt that guideline or framework to its national need and national strategy, so that this high-tech technology will not will minimize the risk of these high-tech technologies, and we maximize the benefits. So it's like I'm not in favor of like having the Bretton Woods 2.2, which are like that of the IMF and World Bank, but I also like in favor of like some framework which can be led by the already existing multinational corporations like UN. Yeah. Back to you.
I just realized that I may have come across as a skeptic of multilateral framework as such. But let me, offer one other perspective in this. So, if you look at, for instance, 60s and 70s, right? If you look at, for instance, the four strategic export control regimes which have been working today, the Australia Group, the Missile Technology Control Regime, the Nuclear Suppliers Group, and the Wassenaar Arrangement. Each of those started as a kind of a minilateral, right? But the trick for that minilaterals to gain wider legitimacy was that they responded to this idea, that they cannot be exclusive clubs, and therefore, retaining the idea of consensus, they added more members to the grouping, right? So that could be one way to look at, for instance, that today's minilaterals, can actually become, those kind of wider frameworks which will have more like-minded partners and yet not dilute the idea of consensus. If you look at, for instance, the existing multilateral framework, it does not operate by consensus. It operates by the rule of majority. And therefore, that, in a sense, leaves some gap in terms of the people who want to take maybe a different path of cooperation. But if you look at, for instance, the strategic export control regimes, they have today become the recognized ways of regulating some of those technologies, be it the nuclear technology, be it the chemical technology, be it the biological warfare technologies, or even the dual-use technologies. And we're talking about the next generation of technologies, that could be one way that we can look at. Thank you.
Thank you for. Yes, we've already touched upon a lot of the different issues, and something that keeps coming back. Then, I mean, if you look at the regulation, then is there a risk of over or under regulating these things? And what are the dangers? I suppose for the low and the mid-tech states of falling behind, or is there a way to bridge the gap or the divide here?
Yeah, so I think this brings us back to a very foundational point that hasn't come up yet in the conversation, which is connectivity. So we've been talking about leapfrogging, for example. We've been talking about more advanced technologies. If we're really going to think about whether there will be or will continue to be a structural digital divide, we have to think about connectivity. I mentioned Brazil before, and while it's accurate what I said about their digital payment system, it's also the case that if you look at measures of what would be called meaningful digital connectivity, that's to say high quality and reliable internet access of the type that allows educational outputs, trade, commerce, work, only 22% of the population has that access. So it's very, very limited. If you look at the UK, so this is not just a global south, global north divide. If you look at the UK, more than 10% of the population is considered not to have meaningful connectivity. So I think both at the domestic level and the international level, one of the most important, and I think it is both a regulatory question and a technology question, is how we bridge that divide. I do also think it's soluble, and there are many countries that are thinking about this. Whether or not it's the larger scale telcos, there are also approaches, for example, in Latin America, in Chile, in Colombia, in other countries in the region, of local internet providers that are more community-based, community-oriented, stepping in, and actually that then creates local innovation ecosystems if you have that nature of provider. So I think this is absolutely critical and foundational to all of the topics that we've been covering today. I also just wanted to mention, I suppose, one other dimension of this, which is infrastructure. We've been talking a little bit about digital public infrastructure and whether, that might be something that can be exported or adapted by many different countries. And I think what we've seen so far, I know that India has had some experience of this, is that there's very meaningful possibilities of this kind of technology transfer, but it's absolutely critical that it's done in a culturally sensitive way. So I think we've seen, for example, in Ukraine, where there's been a very profound use of digital technologies to keep citizens connected, to protect citizens under the conditions of conflict that they're facing. There have been attempts to transport that technology to other countries and regions as well, but it hasn't necessarily become embedded, because it's very, very important when we're thinking about this transfer, not just to think in relation to regulation and governance and capacity building, but also to think about the local context. Are there the skills to be able to engage with this infrastructure that's being imported? Is there the buy-in? Is there the public trust, particularly if a technology is brought from one country to another? So I think it's important to keep in mind all of those different dimensions beyond simply the regulatory piece.
Yeah, you mentioned Ukraine, and we saw use of Starlink, for example, right? So that's a very good example of making internet accessible. But on the other hand, it also makes you very dependent, right? So that's also something, the other side of the coin, but you can use a similar model. But let me just support your skepticism of multilateral mechanisms. I think that's part of the problem, because these mechanisms haven't provided the goods or the results for many of these countries. And I think that brings me back to having to be proactive and taking the initiative. And that's why working in smaller groups, in minilaterals, is more likely to bring the results and to bring solutions that we need. And because these are not only, it's not global north, global south necessarily, it's all kind of countries with all kind of experiences. I think by matching the right groups together, you can actually bring very relevant technologies that are relevant to other countries and help advance quicker, because sometimes the divide is so big that it's just ineffective. Bringing, the most advanced technologies in just doesn't work. So I think this kind of gradual approach, or this kind of matching and mixing approach is probably the most effective, and it has to be problem based, right? So it doesn't have to be a technological alliance on all issues. We need to find the issues that we think India has the strength on, or we think another country, Brazil, has, and work together specifically on solving those issues.
Let me add on this. So to protect the low and mid-tech states, not to be left behind in the era of high-tech, I think this, apart from striving individually as a nation, it's better like to collaborate in different platforms like the BRICS and also the regional cooperation mechanisms. Apart from that, we need also to set the general guidelines to protect the mid and low-tech states by setting rules of fair access of these high-tech technologies. In addition to that, by promoting open source platforms which can be easily customized by low and mid-tech states, so that they can benefit from the technology. At this stage, most of the technologies are not open source. They are like monopolized by big corporates. So there should be a mechanism to make those technologies accessible openly by promoting the open source. In addition to that, there should be also a mechanism that promotes the technology transfer from the high-tech states, or from maybe those corporates, to these mid-tech and low-tech nations, so that they will not be left behind from the benefits of the technology that we are witnessing nowadays. So it's like better like to have some consensus. Maybe that can be led by, as I said earlier, by the UN, so that those points that I raised earlier should be promoted globally and should be supported, so that we all be on the same boat in this 21st century. Thank you.
Right, drawing on that, and the audience did pick up on the connectivity and the infrastructure aspect. So maybe I can merge two of the audience questions. So, well, one very hard question, I suppose, I assume would be aimed to you. So, when would internet connectivity in inland Africa improve, and also how can we enhance the skills of educators in emerging countries to teach the current and new generations despite the lack of infrastructure? I don't know if you want to try and tackle this.
So regarding the connectivity first, so as a nation, if you take my country's experience, the government is hugely investing in the internet connectivity. But it may not be like as best as that of the high-tech nation, but we are striving to create an environment where everyone is connected to the internet. Apart from that, for digital equipment or digital gadgets to run, they need electricity. So the government's also investing hugely on power generation. So these are enabling environment or enabling situations in which, on top of that, we can run the digital maybe apps and other things. So regarding the education, so I think even in previous morning session, the speakers mentioned the integration of AI in the education system. Yeah, it should be, but for most of the nations in low and mid-tech, rather than like integrating AI in education, I think it's also better first to like give education or students or users to be trained on basic sciences, and so that they can like enable to harness their environment, so that they construct the basic things like maybe farming, also industries, and so that finally we'll add on that the AI, maybe like to I can say like we can use AI on top of the existing knowledge, rather than like without any foundation. We can't like dive in directly to the AI. So I feel like we better like focus first on the foundational work, so that once that foundational work is done or has achieved good results, then we will add on top of that these high-tech things. So I feel like that. Yeah. Thank you.
On the connectivity issue, I think that is also one of the challenges which India had faced, particularly when we made the digital public infrastructure as one of the requirements for many of the citizens to actually avail some of the basic government services. So one experiment that the government did try was basically train one person, and that person will then go with the device to the village which does not have the internet connectivity, and basically spend a day there to conduct all sorts of government services. So and these devices are secure, because in a sense, because every individual's fingerprint identity is taken, so that it is only he or she who can access those citizens which services which are unique to that particular person. So they were able to conduct digital payment transactions. They were able to apply for the various kinds of certificates and the driving licenses and those kind of things when this person came to the village on a weekly basis, and they will have a schedule. So that every Sunday that person will be there in the village spending the day. So they know that. So there is that one way to bridge the connectivity which is there. Another way which we have done is that we now have community internet centers, where you can go and access the computer and the internet. whenever you want to do some services. So for instance, now most of the government applications are now online, so you can actually go there and fill up those forms and those kind of things in those community centers. The other idea in terms of bringing the building the digital skills, I think is to think of these skills and these technologies as digital civics, right? So in schools and colleges, we have learned this idea of civics, how you understand your rights as a citizen in operating in a particular polity, but now extend that idea to the digital sphere and say that okay, here is what you should be aware in terms of your responsibilities as a responsible citizen in this tech world, but also here are certain guidelines that you can follow when it comes to learning some of those new technologies. And now we have started to impart these skills right at the grade 3 and 4. So that's one way that at least the future generations, which will be now, I presume, they will be more digital natives than all of us, will be able to look at some of those things. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the entire dynamic, right? That people who did not really have access to the digital devices, who didn't used to spend that much time, have spent their days and weeks together on the digital devices. So I think this is one way to really build those skills and the capacities in terms of connectivity and in terms of just understanding of the technology.
Yeah, I'll just ask maybe one point. I mean, it's true that there's not adequate internet infrastructure in a lot of places, but we are seeing, for example, the spreading use of mobile phones, right? There's a lot of mobile phones there, so if we use simple apps for remote education, for example, that could be a good way to start. And another, maybe a little bit out of the box approach would be, especially with the younger population, to use gaming, especially mobile phone gaming, as a way for education or for educational content. It can be civic or otherwise, because the young people anyway want to play games on their phone, and we can use that as a channel, if you like.
I just wanted to endorse what you said before about the use of AI and digital technologies in the educational sphere, and ensuring that an approach that might emphasize leapfrogging doesn't remove some of the foundational knowledge. There's research that has come out of the UK recently that looks at the role of AI in the educational setting. And there's one particular comparative study which looks at essay writing among senior school students. And it found that students who used ChatGPT either simply to write the essay for them, or actually to draw ideas and then they would develop the essay themselves, had significantly less cognitive development than students who simply wrote the essay themselves, unassisted by AI. Now, I'm not trying to sound like a Luddite and suggest that we should not be using technologies and AI in schools, but I do think that there is an argument to be made for having protected space and time within educational context for that foundational knowledge and understanding, and AI and digital technologies to be an additional layer. And I would caution, also thinking about development funding approaches that often do emphasize the role of digital technologies. I would caution an approach where that is kind of adopted with sweeping disregard for some of this new research that's coming out. So I think it's absolutely about finding that balance and thinking about how to integrate technologies into the educational setting rather than kind of getting carried away with the possibilities.
Yeah, very good point as an educator myself, and this is something that we are really struggling with at the moment. I think we have time for one quick question from the audience before we go over to the policy approach and things to take forward. I suppose, would high-tech be a complement for low-tech industry, or do you think that it will crowd out existing low-tech economies?
I kind of want to frame this as a question about the Indian context, because I know that there's an active discussion about whether India should be developing its own large language models or whether it should be something like a kind of use case capital instead. And I think that's really interesting, like this idea of taking your DPI and then building the application layer, possibly with AI on top of it. So it's not so much as a response as passing on the question. I think the simple answer is I can see a lot of potential for both to come together. I would also actually question whether we should almost still be considering AI in all of its uses as high tech. I wonder whether the language itself is to some degree becoming outdated, because if we think about high tech, we typically think of technologies that are expensive, elite, hard to access. I think very, very rapidly, okay, we had a long period of development, but now that's no longer the case. So I think we should be thinking in these more integrative ways and possibly questioning the language as well. But I will pass on the question.
So, I would actually say, that rather than high tech, I think it's better to use the term transformative tech or the critical tech. I think in a sense itself then changes your viewpoint in terms of how you perceive that particular technology. Because I'm not even using the term disruptive technology, because disruptive means, it is in a sense upending the entire status quo. But I think there is a case to be made that, that if you look at, for instance, the development of the LLMs today, one of the things, which we are repeatedly coming across is the lack of diversity in terms of data sets, like in terms of training of these models. And I think countries like India, countries from Africa, can really provide in terms of diversity of that particular data set. Now, one specific example is, for instance, the autonomous vehicles, right? Autonomous vehicles, if you look at the high-tech countries or the Western countries, they are trained in a much more, I would say, driving in Western countries is a safe space, right? As you look at, for instance, the countries in the global south, right? But the autonomous vehicles are trained on those roads. And if you deploy those vehicles on the roads in the global south, they will not really operate, and there will be many more accidents. But why can't we then, for instance, integrate the data sets from these countries to really, ensuring that these vehicles are, in a sense, trained in that particular manner, which will also then enhance safety. So that could be one way to that look at. But also another way, which is that just the diversity of language, right? If you again look at, for instance, the LLMs, the fact is, that most of them, 90% of them, are actually trained in English, right? But again, if you look at, for instance, the deployment of these LLMs in the all over the world, they are essentially operating in non-English societies. And India, being one such example, where we have several languages with at least, millions of people speaking, there is a case to be made, that the countries which are, operating these LLMs, and the companies which are operating, they can actually look at these particular languages. Now, one word of caution here is that we do not want to end up becoming just the data points and the data sets in the larger deployment of these LLMs. I think that transfer has to happen on an equal footing. It should not be like, that we are used as Dr. Ayano was saying, in terms of the extraction of the critical minerals from Africa and then enhancing the prospects of a country or a company. We do not want to be that kind of end up in that kind of extractive relationship.
Regarding the technology of high tech and mid tech, I think that they will go together. Like if you say like the mechanization agriculture is mid tech, then we can integrate AI so that the productivity of the farmland increased by early detection of diseases, maybe by enhancing the meteorological prediction also for harvesting. So rather than like seeing separately the mid technologies and high techs, I think that we can integrate those technologies so that we can get the benefits from both. Without a mid tech technologies, we can't survive. Without agriculture, no nation can survive. And also, without integrating this high tech in those mid tech technologies, the productivity may not be improved. So I think the amalgamation of both mid-tech and high-tech is crucial for the prosperity. Yeah. Thank you, Raka.
Thank you. Well, we have a couple of minutes left, so I thought that perhaps we can try to limit it to 1 minute each with your key takeaways. If you can see any actionable steps that we can carry forward regarding this, and let's see if we can do the same order again.
Thank you. Well, I started by saying that resilience should lead technology rather than vice versa. And I want to just return to that point to finish, because I think if we're taking that perspective, if we look at many parts of the world, Europe included, we are at a moment where resilience really means thinking about what I would describe as a triple transition. Yes, the technology transition that we've been talking about, but also an energy transition and a need for greater energy security, and then also security and defense transition as well. All of these are incredibly integrated with one another, yet typically we're still planning for them and organizing them in silos. So I think that there's a need for a much greater integration of these different aspects of resilience building. This means ministries working together in different ways. This means different forms of partnership and collaboration between the public and private sector. And as I think has come up many times, it also means different forms of international alliance building. So I think this better integration of technology into broader resilience planning is very, very critical to countries that are taking this transition seriously.
I'll try to take the positive side of things. So I think tech cooperation can really be a connector between countries and between regions, and that's the way we should look at it. In terms of policy, I think that technology cooperation should be the backbone of trade corridors like IMEC, of groupings like I2U2, of BRICS, and I think that could lead to a lot of progress and to solving a lot of issues, but it needs to be practical. So we need to actually tackle real problems and try to solve real issues when it comes to food security, to climate, defense, to many other issues. I think that's important. And I agree with you, by the way, that language and locality are very important. So some of these solutions need to be addressed in local languages, in data and information that's relevant to people. And I think once you have solutions to the things that are really troubling and are really bothering people, if you can improve people's life, I think that will make a lot of progress in terms of cooperation between countries. And I think it's the tech middle powers come together working in this way, we create another kind of trend of cooperation rather than technological competition.
So as a final takeaway, I want to mention 3 points as a final recommendation. So the first is collaboration among states to especially pooling resources and research and development in the integrating this high-tech and mid-tech technologies so that we will get the benefits and we will minimize the risks. So the next is sharing of open source technologies so that the technology will not be monopolized by high-tech states and also big corporates. Rather, it's going to be better to be easily accessible for all states and nations. The other thing is a collaboration again. Alone, these low and mid-tech states may be the price takers or the technology consumers, but when we collaborate then they collaborate together, they can be price setters. Also, they have, as previously discussed, they also create an interdependence between these high-tech states. So also there is also a possibility of exploiting the non-technological assets that they have to have like a leverage in order to just to work together to be price setters rather than simply consumers of these high-tech technologies. Yeah, that's what I have. Thank you, Rekard. Yeah.
So I agree with all the ideas put forward by my esteemed speakers. I think one other way that we can look at is that if you look at, for instance, the idea of nuclear disarmament, if you look at the decade of 40s and 50s, the idea of nuclear disarmament essentially came from these smaller European countries which championed this cause of nuclear disarmament. And I think if you look at that particular era, there is a case that can be made that tech middle powers plus the low and mid tech countries, the global south, can actually focus and champion the conversation on the responsible uses of emerging technologies. I think that particular dialogue is now currently missing. Again, United Nations is doing some things, but given the fact that the problems that the UN system has, it is not really making an enough difference as such. But I think the idea of new international economic order was championed by the G77 countries in the decade of 70s. I think we also now need to look at in terms of an equitable tech order when you look at some of these critical and emerging technologies, an idea which emanates from the global south, led by the middle tech powers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just want to end on the behalf of the Hili Forum. I want to thank you, distinguished speakers, and thank you to the audience for your engagement and your questions. But let's carry on this conversation beyond this room, and I'm sure we need to continue rethinking as well how technology can drive, again, a more balanced and a more resilient world. So on that note, thank you very much, everyone, and we'll be seeing you in the future.